Hello, everybody. My name is Ivan Resendiz. I'm a classical guitarist. I am from Mexico City. I immigrated in 2006 to the United States looking for study, better opportunities. So actually, I have been here for 13 years and I organize a guitar festival, Latin American Guitar Festival, and work with the people in the area, Latin American community, to do social justice, trying to do art with civic engagement, and working with those who are not, they don't have like status here, and they want to study art or do something with creativity, and they deserve to be privileged as us. Thank you very much. I am so excited to be here and performing for you, for all of you. So I wanna thank you, Arts Alliance Illinois, to bring me this opportunity to be here with you. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks, Ivan. I think I've got this working now. Sorry, folks, just had an internet mishap there. My name is Demi Venkov. I'm the Communications and Marketing Manager for Arts Alliance Illinois. I'm here just to do some quick housekeeping. Thank you all for being here for this policy briefing. We hope that performance from Ivan centered you, gave you a little bit of calm this afternoon amid the chaos. If you see on your screen a little raise hand function, if all of you want to raise your hand in gratitude to Ivan for his performance. Yep, I see 38, 40, 50 raised hands already. Just to give you all a sense, there's about 100 people on this webinar. I encourage you all to say hi to one another in the chat function. Just make sure you are communicating to all panelists and attendees. The other piece of housekeeping I'll say is we're going to have time for questions later in the webinar. And for that, you will use the Q&A function, which should be at the bottom of your screen. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the Alliance Executive Director, Claire Rice. Just unmuting you, Claire.
Thanks, Dimi. Welcome, everyone. I was just saying to Dimi that Ivan needed to play a little bit longer so that I could stop weeping because that was absolutely beautiful. Exactly what I needed. I feel like, you know, just such a perfect encapsulation of what we can do to connect with one another in this extraordinarily challenging time that we are facing for our sector. And so I just want to start out and say thank you all for being here. We are here for you. Like that is the underlying message of today. You are so critical to the fabric of our communities across Illinois. We are doing everything we can to support this sector. Part of that is events like today, where Jonathan will share with you some of the developments happening at the federal level that will impact our sector significantly, both some really big wins in that space and then some areas of challenge that we'll be working on into the future. And then, of course, we are also working on our own advocacy and policy efforts at the state and local levels as well. So as you all probably know, Springfield is on a bit of a pause right now in terms of legislation, but we do expect that the legislature will be gathering over the coming weeks to make some things happen, and we will be right at the table where we need to be championing your interests. So today, I just want to kind of lay out what will happen today. We will be diving in because most of the policy change that's going to impact us most immediately, as I'm sure you've been following, has been happening at the federal level, you know, midnight tonight, still, or midnight last night, or midnight this morning, I guess, still going on today. We will be covering and digging into the implications at a high level on the, you know, unemployment, small business, and individual and NEA impacts for the sector. Jonathan will be digging into that, our policy director. And then we will be also providing some space. I mean, we as a convener want to be sure that you all are connecting to one another and raising your questions, your concerns, your best practices. You know, that we're not going to be able to get to everything today, but even that, you know, use that chat feature, put your questions and interests out there, and we are going to do our best to address everything that we can. If not today, we can follow up with you if you have an individual question about your organization or something that's not covered, or if you're interested in diving deeper into one of these policy issues in a later session, we could possibly cover that in more depth. I will also say that we will be doing these briefings on a weekly basis. We are looking into the possibility of, and hoping to, and maybe Dimi, you can reflect on this, but capturing this and letting other folks experience it who weren't able to be online at this time today. And then we are here to repeat these sessions as needed. If the demand outpaces what we're able to handle, we can expand. So we just want to know, we want you all to know, we feel your pain. Like I might not be able to get through this if I keep talking about it, but we feel it deeply. And we are really working for you. So we're here for you. We're going to get down to business. You're going to learn a lot. We probably won't get to everything, and we will do everything we can to address your questions and really have opportunities for you all to connect with one another around some of those questions as well. I will also say that we will be a part of announcing in the very next few days emergency relief efforts for the state of Illinois, both at the organizational level and at the individual level. So that is close. We're close, and just you will all be the first to know. Everyone will know at the same. Well, you won't be the first to know. Everyone's going to know at the same time. But we are really pushing that, and we're hoping that we get to announce that publicly, that all of you can take advantage of funding opportunities coming up early next week. And I'm not going to be able to address like a ton of questions about that at this time, but as soon as we announce, we will be able to address any further questions about, particular emergency relief efforts. So thanks to everyone, and I'm going to turn it over to the nub of the content.
Hey, can everyone hear me okay? All right, well, it's thank you for being on the webinar during this really important time. And as Claire said, our hearts and our thoughts are with you, and our action is with you as well, our advocacy. And a lot of action has taken place over the last couple of days. So this is going to be a very fast, big view of very fast moving, big legislation. What we're going to seek to do is we're going to tailor it to the arts sector and to individual artists and arts NPOs. So I'm going to focus on that in particular. So I'm going to switch now to PowerPoint. And let me know, Demi, if my screen can be seen.
Not yet, Jonathan.
Not yet? So while you're working on that, just let me know when it goes. I'll keep rolling. As Claire said, the nexus of legislative action right now is at the federal level. The federal government has the widest reach. The federal government has the biggest paycheck. So that's where action is happening right now. The Illinois General Assembly is on suspended session for the moment. This legislation has moved quickly, but it's what the government is about. If our federal government is for anything, it's for moments like this, all government actually. And so now is a time when it's particularly important to hold our leaders accountable and to be a voice for the policies that we need as a sector. I'm going to talk about this legislative relief in 3 phases, and I'll bring up the PowerPoint right now. How's that? Can you see it?
I went ahead and shared with the group from my computer, so you can just keep talking, Jonathan.
Okay, great. And so you'll see it when I change it, right?
Just ask me to change it.
You bet. We'll do the beep. I'm old enough to remember that, the beep. So we're going to talk about this federal relief in action in 3 phases. That's the way it's being thought of. And 3 giant pieces of legislation, and they actually get bigger from one to the next. The first phase was called the Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Supplemental Appropriations Act. Try to say that 5 times fast. But that has been signed into law. It's phase 1, and I like to think of that as the health-focused bill. Phase 2 is kind of the health and time-focused bill, and phase 3, which is under discussion now, is about work and stability. So let's go to the current status of legislation there, Demi. So phases 1 and 2, those pieces of legislation have been passed. And phase 3 has passed the Senate late last night, but it has not yet passed the House. And that's what we're going to be looking for tomorrow morning. Let's go to the next one. Phase 1. So I mentioned the title of phase 1. It's all about health. It is enacted into law now. It provides $8.3 billion focus at the public health crisis, the public health part of the crisis, on communities and states, and giving them the money that they need to spend. And it's money that is directed to be spent very quickly. But that's mostly on the public health side. I want to go to phase 2, the second big piece of legislation, and it too has been signed. This piece of legislation does affect many of us and will affect many of us, will benefit many of us at the individual level. This piece of legislation, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, does a number of things. First of all, it mandates that health insurers must cover testing for the coronavirus, including trips to the ER or to a clinic to get tested. That's number one. Number two, it mandates 2 weeks of paid sick leave that's provided to employees. And I'm going to say here, the money for this is coming in just a second, but we're going to look at what it requires first. So it requires that 2 weeks of paid sick leave be provided to employees. Who does this apply to? Well, it applies to employers that have less than 500 employees, and that includes nonprofits. So if you are a nonprofit organization, you have less than 500 employees, this applies to you. Now, the sick leave has to be at the regular rate for someone who is having to be quarantined or to seek a diagnosis, and it's 2/3 of the rate of an employee's regular rate if that employee needs to care for a child or a family member who has the coronavirus, or if they have to care for a child who's at home because of school closures, which many of us are facing as well. So it has a broad application. This sick leave this provision ends at the end of 2020. Now, not only does it expand the sick leave for employees, it also, on top of that, expands Family and Medical Leave Act coverage so that more people are getting it. And again, that provision applies to employers, including nonprofits, with less than 500 employees. And it provides 10 weeks of partially paid family leave or care for a child. And that 12 weeks that it provides would include those 2 paid sick weeks. So now the question is, okay, that's what this bill is providing, is mandating, but how does it get paid for if you're a small nonprofit? And that is, importantly, is covered as well. What will happen is this. If you're a nonprofit in this situation, you will receive a refundable, that's important, a refundable tax credit against the cost that you incur. And you're going to see that tax credit come through a refund of your payroll taxes or your SSI taxes. I mean, essentially payroll taxes. If you are dealing with the family leave, it's the same thing. They're going to provide the federal government's going to provide a refundable tax credit to cover those costs, and that will be full coverage. Another important thing for our sector is that self-employed individuals, so self-employed creatives, are covered by this as well. Even though they're an employee of themselves, what they'll be able to do is apply for an amount equivalent, essentially, to what they've earned, an equivalent amount, as a refundable credit against their income tax. So the good news of this is it applies to workers of nonprofits, and it also applies to self-employed individuals. Those are the first 2 phases, and they are law. Let's take a look at probably what you've heard about in the news the most, and that is phase 3. And we're going to talk about how it impacts our sector as a whole, how it impacts individual artists, individual teaching artists, individual creative professionals, and then how it affects small businesses and nonprofits. And again, I would pause to say a caveat is We're dealing this very broadly, so there's going to be a ton of questions about the details, and some of those details, maybe many of them, you could say, need to still be worked out. But we're going to continue to track this and continue to track the implementation of it. It's also moving fast, so if questions come up later and we don't know the answer right away, we'll find out for you. So phase 3 is called the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid and Relief and Economic Security Act, CARES. The act passed after a lot of fits and starts. It passed the Senate late last night. So if you see someone with really baggy eyes who look tired, they just might be a policy analyst that's been tracking this. It's an 890-page bill, and it includes unprecedented relief. This is the largest relief package in the history of the United States. You're probably hearing the word unprecedented a lot, hearing that word at a precedented level of frequency. Here's what the Senate bill that was passed contains. And there's going to be a lot of pressure for the House to move on it very quickly tomorrow. So the first thing, what does it give the arts sector in particular? First of all, it provides $75 million to the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as $75 million to the National Endowment for the Humanities to provide aid to artists and arts organizations who are struggling with this crisis. There's a number of loosened provisions, which is very important. The matching grant requirements that NEA funds usually require, that's waived. The requirement for grants to be project specific, waived. These are intended, as many of these grants and loans you're going to hear about, they're intended to be fast track and gen ops, and that's incredibly important to our sector. If you're from a museum, you can know that the Institute of Library and Museum Services received $50 million. And then very importantly too, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting has a appropriation of $75 million as well. There's more details there, but those are wins that are very specific, art specific to our sector. Let's go to the next one, Demi, and let's take a look at how this massive bill, as passed by the Senate, how it would affect individuals. So the first thing is you will likely see a straight check in your mailbox from the federal government in about 2 weeks if this bill passes. The bill includes direct payments to individuals. You'll hear these sometimes referred to as stimulus payments. They will be in the amount of $1,200 to individual tax filers who earn up to $75,000 in adjusted gross income. And not to get too wonkish here, but adjusted gross income is basically what your income is after exemptions, deductions, and things like that. So it's not your straight salary. You may be earning more, but if you're an individual filer, you'll receive $1,200 as a straight check. If you're a joint filer, that amount will be $2,400, and that will apply to joint filers, to couples that earn an adjusted gross income of up to $150,000. And then on top of that, there will be a $500 direct payment per child. So there could be direct payments, say for a family of 4 that falls under the income threshold, a payment of $3,400. Now, if you are above that threshold, it doesn't mean that you get nothing. The direct payment will kind of be phased down as it gets above that income. So I'm not getting into the technical parts, but it'll phase down until about a higher amount. I think it's about 200,000 or so, in which it kind of hits zero. But that's the first thing, individual direct payments. The second thing, which is incredibly important, deals with unemployment. The previous bill in phase 2 dealt with if you had a job or if you were self-employed. This, very importantly, deals with if you lose your job. And many of us are facing this in our sector. Many of us as artists and nonprofit arts organizations are really struggling with this reality. What the CARES Act would do, if passed in its current form, would be to, and this is incredibly important, would be to provide unemployment benefits, unemployment coverage for furloughed workers, for freelancers, and for gig economy workers. That's not a common thing. We've not seen that much before, but it is in this bill. In addition to that, what it would do is the federal government would provide or would make available the $600 a week in addition to what the state provides for up to 4 months. Right now, Illinois provides, I believe, 26 weeks. That would be further extended with the $600 on top of this. So that is a large part of the package in terms of its impact on individuals. Well, what about creative small businesses? What about the small film company? What about the nonprofit theater? What does this bill do for them? What the bill does is it really channels the relief and assistance through the Small Business Administration. And what we see here is a government trying to move as much money as possible and quickly. And to do that, it has to use the existing structures that it has. And when it comes to nonprofits and small businesses, it's the Small Business Administration. There is $350 billion in the bill, and believe me, the word million almost is used a lot, but so is billion, and then the whole package is 2 trillion. Well, this is 350 billion, and it goes to small businesses through what's called a 7A loan program. Just forget the 7A. Know that it's the standard program that the SBA uses for small businesses. Now, these loans would be equal to about 2.5 months payroll. They would max out at $10 million. And the loans could be used for working capital. That's the design, for meeting payroll, for facilities costs, debt service, health insurance premiums. Their design is kind of the Gen Ops version of a business loan. And there are strings, though. This is not entirely string free. The loans would be forgivable. They would be forgiven on the back end. However, employers would have to show that they've maintained employment between March and June 30. So essentially what they're saying is you can get these loans, they can be forgivable, but the federal government wants to see on the back end that you've maintained your payroll. So now, are nonprofits eligible for these loans? The answer is yes, they are indeed eligible. These loans will be available to charitable nonprofits that have 500 or fewer employees. Are they, will they go to self-employed individuals? Again, the answer is yes. They are intended to also apply to self-employed workers like individual artists and to independent contractors. Now, that's the biggest package of small business and loan relief. There's another one as well, and that is there's $10 billion for a smaller pot that goes to emergency economic injury disaster loans. And those are available now, and you may have heard about them because when Governor Pritzker declared a disaster, essentially made the proclamation, it made this money available. 2 final points, areas. First of all, unemployment insurance. If you're a nonprofit organization like businesses, you have a choice to cover your unemployment insurance by making regular contributions, regular tax payments, or you can do a reimbursement or a pay-as-you-go. For organizations that took the pay-as-you-go, the reimbursement method, how could they have seen this? They couldn't have. And so one of the things that we're looking at is, can those organizations that have taken that reimbursement rate, can we work with the state to give them the opportunity to transfer back to retroactively this year to the standard kind of measured payment rate? I would say, and this is one area that we're looking into more detail on, is that the CARES bill that passed out of the Senate does provide funds from the federal government to help nonprofit organizations meet the liability when they're stuck in situations like the reimbursement method. At this point, it looks like that's up to 50% of liability, but we'll look into that more. And then finally, for nonprofits, what about charitable giving? Charitable giving is now more important than ever at a time when many people are less able to give. We need all the incentives that we can get. So the CARES bill provides for a $300 deduction. It's what they call an above the line deduction. So it's a particularly good one, but it applies a $300 deduction to charitable contributions made up to $300 for everybody. So even if you don't itemize, even if you just do a standard deduction, you can still take $300 in a charitable deduction. And frankly, that's something that we've been going for. The Alliance and partners have been fighting for a long time. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I do want to say an encouragement. First of all, you're not alone. We're thinking about you every day, and we're thinking about you through policy and through advocacy. How can we assist you in this communal effort of getting the public support and investment that you need? And keep in mind, the current system, it's just not intended for this load. So this load of unemployment claims, of loan claims. So you're gonna experience holds, but if we as artists know anything, it's how to persevere. We persevere to make things happen. And we'll all need to persevere to access these loans, just as the government tries to get them to as quickly as possible. So hang in there, and let's switch it to see if anyone has any questions about this massive and also massively important piece of legislation.
Yeah, Jonathan, we've had a few questions coming in, and just a reminder for everyone watching that at the bottom of your screen is a Q&A button that you can push and type in your questions. We've had some good questions coming in from Jordan and Sarah and Janine. Jonathan, do you want to start answering those, or go ahead and bring Chris in?
Yeah, let's bring Chris in. I've talked enough. I managed to get through it without my dog barking, which is a good thing. He's not a policy expert yet. But let's have a little bit of conversation and some Q&A, and I'm going to hand it off to Chris. We're really glad that Chris is on from the Alphawood Foundation and individual artist, and he's going to lead us in some Q&A and thinking through this. So take it away, Chris.
Hey folks, I'm Chris Haldane. I'm Program Officer at Alphawood Foundation. I'm a performer when I find the time. And I'm here just to help Arts Alliance Illinois. They reached out and asked if I could help facilitate some conversation. And anytime they ask me to do anything, I say yes, because they mean a lot to what they do for the arts and culture sector in the state and in the city. So I think what we're gonna do first is we're gonna practice some of these buttons. Chris, what kind of performer? I sing. I used to do theater. Thanks for checking. So we're gonna raise our hands, and this is a show of gratitude for Arts Alliance Illinois and all the work they're doing. So everyone check that button to make sure that your hands raise. 40, we got up to 43, 50, 60. Okay, it's going up. So you guys know how to do that. Great. I also want to take a moment to thank all the folks on this call, all the people in the arts and culture sector who, you know, I'm board chair of Congo Square Theater, and we had to close the last 2 weekends of our show. So I know a lot of people have had to completely stop, and that's kind of, 1 second here, I accidentally closed my screen. Sorry, and I know a lot of people had to shut down, and that was a couple of weeks ago, and that may seem like an eternity ago. And now it's like, what now? And I just want to, you know, be in solidarity with you as we navigate this and determine how we move ahead. So first, I want to see the questions that came that are for Jonathan. Does phase 3 include educators?
Does phase 3 include educators? It would include, well, I usually view the educators in two ways. One, individual artists or teaching artists, and then also educators who are working for a nonprofit arts education organization. Then there's educators who are working for school systems, arts teachers. The arts educators, the teaching artists, would be, my understanding, again, this is all the caveat that a lot of it's changing and there's details to work out, but my understanding is they would essentially be treated, if they're on their own, as a self-employed or a contract worker, if they function that way. If they are self-employed, maybe they own a business or have organized in order to do the arts education, they would apply from that vantage point. So arts educators should be the same as individual artists in terms of whether they're self-employed, whether they're an employee, things like that.
Thank you. Another question. Has the government indicated what tax year they are using to determine people's AGI, especially considering the change in federal filing date to July 15 this year?
We'll look that up. I don't know that for sure. I know that in many of the provisions that I've seen, it's the 2019 tax year, and that's what I expect. I think that some of it's going to be by individual program. I know, for example, the Small Business Administration's program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program that's run through the state of Illinois, may have its own provisions in terms of how it calculates eligibility and things like that. So it's going to vary by the specific program, I imagine. But we'll look into that.
Great. So that's all the questions I'm going to ask directly about policy. But I believe that these questions can be saved, and if Jonathan can't get to you right now, they'll find a way to get the answers to those questions because there's some very good ones.
And see chat too, because when you have a big bill like this, we can do something now that we couldn't do in the distant past, and that is group source the answers. So, but we will find the answer to and verify it. So.
All right. So next, we're gonna try some polls. Or actually, first, why don't we? Can we open it up if people want to speak? Is that easy enough to do? And the question is going to be, we just want to hear how folks are doing. Some of the challenges they've faced, some of the solutions they've had in the short term, perhaps moving anything online, just kind of a temperature check on how folks in the sector are doing.
So if you want to speak, just raise your hand and we'll click on you individually.
So right now we've got 13 people with raised hands.
Why don't I'll lower all hands right now, and then if people want to talk, go ahead and click raise your hand now if you'd like to speak.
And we're just speaking on some of the challenges we faced, some of the solutions we've had, and a general check on how we're doing as we're here together.
Well, if no one's wanting to jump in, I would ask Chris, maybe I've seen a couple questions in the thread about the SBA loans.
Go for it.
And just wondering if folks, if Jonathan, maybe, I know it's all information and a lot of this is going to take shape at a local and state level. But if you want to address sort of timing, maybe a little more detail on the SBA piece, just because I'm seeing a lot of folks in the thread interested in more details about SBA.
Yeah, so kind of picking up with the previous question on the SBA in terms of timing, I would note that the timing of what tax year you present is going to depend when you apply, how further down, and whether it's inside the window or outside the window. What I would say is that it's a little bit of an odd fish in terms of a forgivable SBA loan. And again, all this is very broad and general, but basically the way the forgivable SBA loans would work is in their desire to get you the money quickly. Some of the paperwork they're seeking to reduce at the start. So in terms of your intention of keeping employees on, et cetera, it would be more of a good faith statement up front. I'm defining it very generally. And then what would happen is on the back end, you would have to provide the documentation in order to kick in the forgivable part. I would say when it comes to economic injury disaster loans, for those loans, the first year is deferred. Self-employed people, again, I really want to emphasize that self-employed people are eligible for these loans. I think that's particularly important. And I would also urge people to apply now. The one thing about the Small Business Administration loans, or at least not the economic injury loans, is that you can always say no. If you get a better, if you're offered a loan and you're given a better offer somewhere else, or you're taking another route, you can always decline it without penalty. And because of that, and because there's a lot of demand, when I talked to a Small Business Administration official yesterday, they said, do it, apply, start the process now, visit the site now.
All right, I think we've got one hand. Deb Kerr.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yep. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Deb Carr from Intuit, the Center for Intuitive and Outsider Art, and I completed my SBA loan package today and submitted it. It was, I've been trying to get it in for about a week, and they changed the site as of about 5 p.m. yesterday. So now the application form, there's a lot of pieces to it. There's about 5 pieces, but it's not onerous. And I went ahead and applied at the advice of IFF, who holds our mortgage for our building. So I would just recommend get it in. I put together a case for 3 months worth of expenses, complete expenses. I mean, I took the total income that we would expect over 3 months, and it was pretty easy to justify. And then I added another 30% on top of that because we might need, it's not going to be turnkey to start right back up again. I added in for marketing and fundraising efforts, and I felt it was a pretty easy justification. There aren't a lot of guidelines as to what to submit, so I just talked about who we are, what our programs are, and what we would need to offset 3 months plus.
Yeah, thank you, Deb. Thank you.
Great.
The one thing I would quickly add to that is that some people on the phone might be receiving an SBA loan through another program. If that's the case that you're in, you can receive these loans if you're receiving other assistance as well. So again, the message here, and thanks, Deb, is that go for it. Also keep in mind that this whole package is really intended as a 4-month package. And the reality, our reality as a sector, is it's going to take probably longer than that. And so getting these resources into your hands quickly is important. And then the advocacy continues.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. So the first poll we're going to do is getting a sense of who's in the room. And so do we have that poll? There we go, great. What is your primary role in the creative sector? Individual artist, administrator, nonprofit arts, administrator or nonprofit of a nonprofit arts organization, administrator of a nonprofit arts service organization, a board member, arts educator, work at a foundation, or another funder. So if you could please go ahead and complete that poll. And if you fit into multiple, select the one that you do the most.
Chris, there's a request for you to sing while the poll is going on. I don't know how you feel about that.
You know what? I started this thing where anytime I'm asked, I do sing now. It's like a performance thing. So I will. Let's see.
Hey.
Lean on me when you're not strong. I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. That was Lean on Me by Bill Withers, if you have not heard that song.
Thanks, Chris. That was awesome.
Sarah, is that a hand? Oh, that was, thank you. Thanks, Phil. All right, so we're getting some results in. We've got, looks like 60% administrators, 8% individual artists, 13% nonprofit art service organizations, and then pretty evenly spread out between board members, arts educators, and the rest of the questions there. So this is looking like it's about half arts administrators, and then the second largest group is artists. So the next poll then is we're gonna do the arts administration, or you got the artists, individual artists, it's up. Individual creative professionals. So the folks who selected this as individual artists as their first response, this is primarily focused on them. If you know artists and know what some of their most challenging areas are, you can fill this out. Otherwise, you may just abstain. Individual creative professionals. What is your biggest concern right now related to the COVID crisis? We know there are many, but please choose your biggest concern. Difficulty meeting basic expenses, loss of community, loss of future paid work, loss of career opportunities, health, wellness, and healthcare, or something else. So we'll look to get those in.
Hey, Jonathan, while we're doing the poll, why don't you go ahead and just answer, sorry guys, this is our first webinar like this, so just bear with us, but why don't you answer some of the more specific questions in the Q&A, and then you can just type answers to folks individually that if they're very specific, but then the broader questions maybe Chris can raise in a bigger tent.
Yeah, and I think I'm looking again at a lot of SBA questions that are there, and to the extent we're also recording the chat and the questions too, so we'll get that too. The question, can you get an SBA loan if you are an all-volunteer arts council to cover overhead? That I do not know. I think that's a really good question, and we'll look into it. My sense is that that would not be the case in terms of looking at the general language and the existing programs. They're really looking at paid employees and businesses that are structured as paid employees or a self-employed individual. That's essentially where I'm leaning on that question. Again, we'll look that up. And I will continue to scroll through here. Will our agency's accountant be the best place to go for detailed interpretation? How good is your accountant? If they are good and you trust them, yes, they're a good place to go. We as the Alliance will also be putting out information in terms of the broader policy aspects. I just recommend looking at two sources. There's one thing that I've noticed is there's a lot of information coming out about these laws very quickly, and sometimes they say different things. So as is always the case, don't rely on just one source, but the accountant is a good one to go to, particularly because they're going to know your specific situation.
All right, so we now have the second poll coming in, which was to individual creative professionals. What is the biggest concern right now? loss of future paid work was the highest selected, followed by loss of career opportunities, then difficulty meeting basic expenses, as well as loss of community were next, followed by health and wellness and healthcare. So loss of future paid work, I think, as it comes in front, may indicate that because people don't, one, things were canceled, and then secondly, they don't know when things are gonna start back up. You know, if you have a really good opportunity booked and then it's canceled, it's hard to recreate that. So that's good data. So the next poll is for organizations. It's a similar question as the last one, but focused on organizations. Businesses and nonprofits, what is your biggest concern right now related to the COVID crisis? We know there are many, but please choose your biggest concern. Meeting payroll, cash flow, lost earned revenue, lost audiences, uncertainty about end date, ability to adapt to new normal, or something else.
And then in terms of, while people are answering that question or looking at that poll question, one of the questions that was asked, and it may apply to many of you on this call, on this webinar, is if your organization has an existing or ongoing or in the process NEH or IMLS grant that is impacted by the lockdown or the matching requirements waived. My understanding is no, that the waivers and the GenOps component of it applies to new grants. If they're in process, I don't think that would be the case either. So we're looking at just these new streams, but again, check with your contact in terms of processing that grant.
Jonathan, why don't you do one more? In terms of is there a budget limit for nonprofits to apply for support through the SBA? I believe that what is going to happen is that the same limits that apply for for-profits will apply to small profits. So again, I'm just going to go back to the one that has been given the most specifics out front, and that is that the economic injury disaster loans, the caps that they do have, you will have to show that as a nonprofit too, and they'll issue regulations or clarity on this. It'll involve more of what is your gross revenue and what things are in and out. That's an example where the specifics are still coming in, but those caps will apply to you as well. They just may be calculated differently.
All right, so now thank you for those who filled this poll out. The highest response rate for your biggest concern is lost earned revenue, and that's at 33%. The next is cash flow, which is at 25%, followed by uncertainty about the end date, and then meeting payroll. So the financial implications, as we all know, are very significant, and how things will get back to normal.
I would, if I can add quickly, jumping on, one of the things I would say is that I've been encouraged by the degree to which government organizations that oftentimes are unable to or do not show flexibility are showing that now, and they should. This is a crisis. So part of our advocacy as a sector is advocating for ourselves as individuals to ask for that. I think someone checked in on a question and said that they spoke with the NEA this morning and they are considering allowing people to expand the grant period. So we advocate as a sector, but we also encourage each other to advocate individually for our own case that there's flexibility that's provided. There's also a question that came in, is loan forgiveness guaranteed with an SBA loan? And at least in terms of the 7A loans or the standard loans that I was talking about that would be forgivable, it's not guaranteed. You have to show again, at the back end, not at the front, but you have to show in order for the loan to be forgivable that you've met the requirements that have been established under this expanded eligibility in the law. And that involves maintaining payroll.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Are there any other questions or responses anyone has that they'd like to share?
And I want to let folks know that, the questions we didn't get to in the Q&A box, we will endeavor to answer with you directly as a follow-up to this webinar. And I want to be respectful of time too, because I know people mid-crisis we're all just on one emergency call after another. Also, thank you, Andrea, to putting this webinar for training for small businesses that addresses one of Sabrina's questions around, is the Arts Alliance going to help organizations apply for small business loans? I think we'll provide as much information as we can. I think we'll leave that to folks and partner with folks that are more experienced in the space and get resources out there to you to help with that. So yes and no, like maybe not directly, but we will certainly provide indirect resources to support this process, because a lot of us, this is going to be the first time we're in these spaces, right? This is an unprecedented, just to use the word again, crisis. And so we will be helping to provide the clarity and pathways to the resources to get access to these things. And thank you, Deb, also for offering your own resources for folks who want to reach out to you. That's very, very kind. And I will say also, to just sort of put a closing point on this, John, CSO, asked what you all can do individually and collectively to help the Arts Alliance. I think keep making your work, keep creating and keep the hope and the spirit alive of our sector is an extremely important piece of this. I think we're not going to overtax you with advocacy actions. We're going to prioritize, because there are so many things we could work on right now. We're going to work on the things that are going to have the biggest impact for the most folks in the sector. So when we do ask you to take action, it's because we need you to take action. So please do be responsive to those advocacy actions when they come out from us. And then I will also say, as we are building a shared content site it's called Arts for Illinois, that is going to be a reflective and connective moment, a gift from our sector to the general public of Illinois. One of the ways we're going to demonstrate the value of our field is not just coming with our hands out, for help, but to be positioning our work as part of the solution to this challenge right now. And so that is also really important. So ways in which you all can contribute to that shared content site. There was a note that we sent out to be able to do that, but please feel free to follow up with us if you have online content or new creative ideas and new ways you're connecting with your audiences that you'd want to expand to this shared content platform. And just please do keep in touch, reach out. We will be repeating these. We can get more detailed, more granular. We'd love your feedback on this session. It's our like I said, our first dip in the water, and we're going to plan on doing these weekly. And we'll try to put the agenda out in advance too on the topics that we'll cover, so that if to let you know what we'll be touching on in broad brushstrokes, so that whether it makes sense for you to engage with these particular set of topics. So we hope to see you back. We also hope to provide a forum for you all to talk and connect with one another, as we've tried to do today. So thank you so much for joining. We had, I think, over 110 people on the webinar today, and I know you were all hungry for support and for understanding all of these big sweeping pieces that are coming down the pike. You know, the NEA money is not nearly enough, or NEH, IMLS, none of that is nearly enough. The small business loans piece is huge for our sector. So we're kind of celebrating some things and really pushing on some others, and we'll keep working for you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.